Like the video. Thumb up the video.
Right, bro, can you give us 10 minutes? We'd like to switch some things around so that we can have a better environment for the presentation. So we'll take a 10-minute break, 8:30, we'll be ready to roll. To be here, to have the opportunity to just share some information with you about, subject matter that's very near and dear to my heart, history, culture, and all those things that make us who we are. I was over at UAM last night giving a presentation, and I want to share some information with you. How you doing, sis? All right, I remember. You retired? You've been retired now for a couple of years. You look so much happier. Something that I'll be sharing with you all this evening is something that I shared with the audience last night. As Reverend Brown just mentioned, I just got back from Egypt last month, and we're currently working on an excavation in Egypt, an excavation of 25th Dynasty tomb. And last Wednesday, the Egyptian government finally issued a press release about the findings that we made last month. And so now I'm free to talk about what we've done and to share pictures about what we've done. As a matter of fact, I started receiving a slew of phone calls and emails this morning and was informed that, I forget the sister's name who does the weekly commentary on the Tom Joyner Morning Show. She did a commentary on our discovery this morning in Tom Joyner's Morning Show. So it's about to go national, and what is about to become nationally known, I feel, is our opportunity to begin to find our proper place and to assert our proper place, not just into this society, but into the world. So everything goes in cycles, and I came in on the tail end of Reverend Oliver's talk, but what he was sharing with you all is so meaningful to me because I'll be heading to Selma next Tuesday, and this will make my third trip to Alabama since April. I was there in April to do some presentations at Selma, and while I was there, actually I was at University of Alabama in Huntsville to do a presentation, and then went down to Selma. And on my way to Selma, I stopped down at my mother's and grandparents' hometown, Vernon, Alabama, which gave me an opportunity to meet family members that I never knew I had. And the beautiful thing about going down there and meeting family, the place where my mother was born, both my maternal grandparents were born, to get to the place where the Walker family lives, and to see that I guess he's my cousin, my distant cousin, who's John Walker, and his brother lives around the corner, Ed Walker, lives on a street that is named after them. Lives on 280 acres of land that was owned by their cousin. So when you have your own, you can name things after yourself. You can retain your history and your names and your language and your culture. And those are things that are so crucially important to our ability to remember who we were and to be able to move into a future that we design because we understand who we were. So this is so critically important to our essence as a people. So I truly appreciated what Reverend Oliver had to share. And with regards to Alabama being, tourism being a major component of the economy of Alabama, I can attest to that. Specifically in Selma, where I have been spending a lot of time, there's a powerful, dynamic couple, Sister Rose Sanders and her husband, Hank Sanders. They're both attorneys, been involved in the civil rights movement from the onset. Hank Sanders is a member of the state legislature. They are a powerful couple. They own 2 museums. They sponsor the annual march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge every year. They have started a civil rights museum, which is right at the foot of the bridge. They have a slavery and civil war museum, and they're about to start an African educational museum. So they're movers and shakers. But they don't move and they don't shake without stirring the wrath of others who want to quiet them. They have a radio station in which they play music, but also talk about our struggle for liberation. And their antenna has been bombed by the Klan on at least 3 occasions. They have a camp. They bought property where they have a camp called the 21st Century Leaders, where they bring together dozens of teenagers during the summer and take them in an environment outside of Selma, which is certifiably insane. Take them into the country where they have this wonderful facility, lodging facilities, eating facilities, and meeting facilities, where they have been organizing these events for several years. The Klan came in and vandalized that environment. Bricks have been thrown through their office window on Main Street in Selma. So they're fighting a good fight, and there are people who, if they have the opportunity, will put us back into slavery yesterday. So what my brother was saying about us beginning to understand the power of our dollars and using this currency to our benefit is the key to our liberation. And you said if we can withhold our money for a month, we would change the whole power balance, not just in Brooklyn, but all over this country. If we withheld our dollars between Black Friday and Christmas Eve, we would have the European in the palm of our hand. Because that is when they get out of the red on Black Friday. That's why they call it Black Friday. That is when they make a profit. So if we did not participate in this Christmas celebration, spending money we don't have for people that we often don't like, we would not be in debt, and folk would begin to listen to us and pay us more attention because we are using our dollars wisely. Makes common sense, but common sense is not a common commodity. So I want to talk today about the economics of culture and memory and why our history is important. History is a subject matter that is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm always pleased to have an opportunity to talk about what is on my heart. Now, Malcolm X once said that of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward all research. And I feel very strongly that Malcolm came to this conclusion as a result of his regular consultation with one of his advisors, Dr. John Henry Clark, who's no stranger to you all. Dr. Clark, as you know, was a professor at Hunter College. A dear friend of mine, wrote the introduction to my second book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. And one of Dr. Clark's most favorite quotes, or most famous quotes, is a quote that history is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. That history is the compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells the people who they were and where they were, who they are and where they are. But the most important role of history is to tell the people where they still must go and who they still must be. And that the relationship between a person and their history is the same as a relationship between a person, a child, and his mother. So history is something that we cannot afford to take for granted. So the life of a historian is built on a foundation of memory. And memory is nothing more than the collection of images and information that have been printed indelibly on the brain. And when properly accessed and sequenced, historical memories helps one understand what Dr. Clark meant when he said that all history is a current event. If you understand clearly what happened 5,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 5 years ago, or 5 minutes ago, that helps you understand how you got where you are today and where you will be 5 minutes from now, 5 years from now, 500 years from now, 5,000 years from now. History is cyclical, and it follows specific patterns and cycles. And once you study history and begin to discern the very subtle changes in those patterns and those cycles, then there is no mystery as to why you're in the shape that you're in. You know how you got there, and you also know what you must do to get out of that situation, because history tells you what you have done. It repeats itself. So what we have to begin to understand is that we must become serious studies of history. Unfortunately, if you talk to the average person, they won't have an interest in history because of how they have been taught to approach history. They think it's just names and dates and this and that, but history is life. History is as important to you as the air you breathe. And as someone who has spent 33 years of my life researching African and African American history and culture, I've come to see myself as less of a historian and more as a memory recovery specialist. See, over the years I've come to understand that many of our people suffer from MS, excessive historical memory loss. We don't think history is important. We think it's irrelevant. So we wind up repeating the mistakes of history over and over and over again. So my job is not to come to folk as a historian, but to come to them and help them retrieve their memory of the past, so that they can begin to understand why this stuff keeps happening to you over and over again. The role that you're playing in making the same mistakes, which draws the same energy to you again and again and again. Once you understand the dynamic and change your relationship to that dynamic, you then become the creator of your own story, which then becomes your history. That's how the process unfolds. And so, when I think about the power of historical memory, I can't think of any better example to illustrate that point than the city where I've been living for the last 39 years, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is the capital of the wealthiest and most powerful nation in human history. And it did not achieve that status accidentally. So I want you to do me a favor. I want you to close your eyes for 1 minute. And I want you to access your historical memory banks. I want you to think of one singular image that best represents Washington, D.C. One singular image. Access your historical memory banks. Now I want you to bring that singular image to the forefront of your mind. Now open your eyes. How many of you all saw that image, the Washington Monument?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay? You saw that image because it is ingrained in your memory banks. It's there. And your ability to access that memory then helps you begin to recall the history that is associated with it. So by virtue of the education that we all received here in this country, then what you associate with this structure is, one, its name, the Washington Monument, and then you also associate it with a man, George Washington, who is a founding father and the first president of the United States. All of you all know that. How do I know you know that? Because you all were educated by the same folk who educated me. And we were all given the same memories, which we access the same way. Throughout this country, cities and streets and universities and institutions bear the name of this founding father. They bear his name in order to ensure that his legacy will never be forgotten. That is why you name institutions and organizations. It's one example of the importance of memory and culture. The Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. is the oldest cultural institution in the city. This building contains the largest collection of knowledge in the world. It has in its collections over 25 million artifacts. It receives on average 13,000 items every single week. It is an ever-expanding collection of images, knowledge, and information. The idea of a congressional library was first suggested by James Madison in 1783. Madison, as you all know, was the father of the U.S. Constitution. Madison understood very clearly that if the United States, he understood very clearly the words of the Roman philosopher Cicero, who said that to not know what happened before one was born is to always remain a child. So, if the United States of America was to take its place among the pantheon of great nations, then she had to have access of all of the knowledge of the great nations that preceded her. So in 1800, President John Adams signed a bill authorizing the establishment of the Library of Congress. And he purchased 740 books from booksellers in England. And in an effort to create a national identity, America's founding fathers returned to their motherland, England, to access their ancestral memory. They read books on English history in order to find their way. They also read books on ancient Rome. Why? Because England, or Great Britain, was given its foundation by Rome. Julius Caesar conquered Great Britain and named the country Britain. They studied Rome, the nation that gave birth to England. They studied books on ancient Greece, the nation that gave birth to Rome, and by extension, the United States of America. So this multicultural heritage has been artistically integrated and expressed historically in the Greco-Roman architecture that we find in Washington, D.C., and every major city throughout the United States. The architecture of all of your state buildings is Greco-Roman architecture, because these people understand the need to access these historical and cultural memories so that they can be who they were. It's a very simple process. It is a way of preserving cultural memories in stone, glass, and steel. So architecture is more than just architecture. Building is more than just a building. A building contains the soul of a people. Once you begin to understand that, you begin to see on a basic level that these are sacred institutions that affect everyone who moves through that structure, whether you understand it or not. So I want to use the Library of Congress as an example to illustrate how people preserve memory in stone, glass, and steel. So I want you to imagine that you are a scholar who is coming to the Library of Congress to conduct some research. And you're going to walk through the building in order to get to the main reading room. The Library of Congress was named in honor of the Roman goddess Minerva, goddess of wisdom, knowledge, and power. And the architects in Washington, D.C. referred to this building as Minerva's Temple of Learning. I have a book that I wrote 5 years ago called Egypt on the Potomac, A Guide to Decoding Egyptian Architecture and Symbolism in Washington, D.C. And based on my analysis of the layout, design, and development of Washington, D.C., I can prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that the people responsible for creating the nation's capital, the first planned capital in history, literally sought to create the essence of ancient Kemet, the Nile River Valley, in the Potomac River Valley. They were very clear about what they were doing. And so by extension, the Library of Alexandria was, during the time of the Greeks and the Romans, the greatest repository of culture and knowledge in the history of the world. The Library of Congress is, by extension today, the greatest repository of culture and knowledge in the history of the world. It is the American version of the Library of Alexandria. History is repeating itself. Why? Because folk who understand history are writing it. So, imagine you're coming into Minerva's Temple of Learning. You enter the building by coming up these stairs, and you can come in through one of three doorways. And above each of the doorway is a sculpted image that depicts three ways that knowledge is transferred intergenerationally. The first way is through the oral tradition. The second way is through the written tradition. The third way is through the printed tradition. Three ways of preserving memory, culture, and history, and passing it on to those who come behind you. As you walk inside of the vestibule of the building, you're greeted by 16 statues of Minerva in two different forms. One statue shows you Minerva holding a globe and a scroll. It represents Minerva, goddess of knowledge and wisdom. The other statue shows you Minerva holding a torch and a sword, representing Minerva, goddess of war. And combined, they symbolize the idea that knowledge is power. And they serve to invite you into Minerva's Temple of Learning. Certain things are being reinforced over and over and over again. As I mentioned in last night's presentation and talking about the U.S. Customs House, these symbols are there in order to tell those with eyes to see and a mind to comprehend what is really going on. They are a way of literally encoding secrets that are hidden in plain sight. White folk don't have to hide knowledge from you. They can put it right in front of your face. But if you're too lazy to read or to study, then you'll never be able to understand what has always been right at your fingertips. So then when you continue walking into the building, you come into the Great Hall. And you walk into the Great Hall, what you find in the center of the floor is this radiating starburst, which is made out of 3 different colors of marble. And in the center of the starburst is a brass medallion in the form of a sun, and that sun is specifically serves as a compass rose. You see the 4 directions of the compass, north, south, east, and west. So it begs the question, why is there a compass in the center of the floor of the main of the Great Hall in the Library of Congress? Well, we all know that a compass gives one direction. So the idea that it's suggesting here is that this building gives direction. The question then is, to whom does the building give direction? The building gives direction to, and on the floor there are a series of 12 circular medallions. And in each of those medallions is one of the 12 signs of the zodiac. So the building gives direction to everyone born out of the 12 signs of the zodiac. There are also a pair of sculpted images here and here. Those sculpted images also reinforce the fact that this room gives instruction, or this building gives instruction to everyone from the 4 corners of the earth. It gives instruction to the Native American and the African. It gives instruction to the Asian and the Caucasian. It reinforces the fact that this building contains knowledge from all over the world. And those who want to know the world or master the world must come to this place to access these cultural memories. So as you continue walking into the building, you come into the main reading room, which is in the center of the building. In the main reading room, which sits under a dome in the center of the building, there's a painting in the collar of the dome. Painting was done by an artist by the name of Blatchfield. It is the most famous work of art in the Library of Congress. That painting depicts the 11 epochs or great civilizations or cultures that contributed to the development of the United States of America. This painting is the clock that Dr. Clark talked about. The clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It's the compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. This is the most famous work in the Library of Congress, and that clock consists of 12 figures. First figure here represents America. The last figure here represents, the first figure here is Egypt. The last figure here is America. And the clock moves counterclockwise, moving back. Actually moving back into the future and the present. Beginning in Kemet. We have here 12 figures. Next to the figure is the name of the country that they represent, and below that name is that nation or that era's contribution to culture and civilization. So I want to run through these figures very briefly so that you can understand the significance of this painting. Egypt is the first figure. Kemet is the first figure. Egypt gave the world written records. Then comes Judea, which gave the world religion. Greece gave philosophy. Rome gave administration. Islam gave physics. The Middle Ages gave us our modern languages. Italy gave fine art. Germany gave printing. Spain gave discovery. England gave literature. France gave emancipation, and America gave the world science. And the person who represents America is the image of a young, beardless Abraham Lincoln. The reason why the artist selected Abraham Lincoln was because Abraham Lincoln was born poor. Abraham Lincoln didn't know his dad. Abraham Lincoln was a failure in every activity that he attempted as a young man until he finally found his footing in politics and then went on to become the 16th president of the United States. Some say the greatest president of the United States. It's all relative. But the important thing is that Abraham Lincoln is depicted as an electrical engineer. America represents science. The representation of science in this instance is the literal definition of science from the Latin cere, which means to know. So America represents, America is then the beneficiary of all of the knowledge that preceded it, and it is applying this knowledge in order to move forward and create its own history. So Lincoln is an electrical engineer. He's making a dynamo, and he's stumped. He's got to a point in the construction of this object where it can't work, and he doesn't know how to move forward. He's holding a book in one hand, and he's resting his chin, his chin in his hand, and he's thinking. He is literally tapping into a stream of consciousness that goes back through the ages all the way to Kemet in order to define the answer to the problem that he's stumped with. So we see here in the greatest institution of memory in the world that they acknowledge Egypt or Kemet as the source of all knowledge. So then let us move forward to Kemet and let us look at what we know about Egypt. Reality is the same people who taught us about George Washington taught us about Egypt. And so we're faced with a dilemma where we have to begin to unlearn what we have learned, which is a process that requires deliberate and consistent effort. For example, and for those of you all who were at the lecture yesterday, you all be quiet, okay? Because you all know the answer. I just want to quiz folk in the audience tonight. What is the name of this structure here? Pyramid. Pyramid. Pyramid, all right? What is the name of this structure? Sphinx. Sphinx. What is the name of the country where these objects are found? Egypt, right? By virtue of your education, you all gave me incorrect answers. Because those words, pyramid, Sphinx, and Egypt, are Greek words. Those words came into existence thousands of years after these structures were already made. So we have to be able to put history in context so that we know whose history we're talking about. And what we'll find is that in most instances, we have been written out of our own history. Our history has been interpreted by the invaders of Africa. So we see our world through their eyes. We interpret our world, our reality, through their language, which is inadequate to describe our reality. So then the process of reclaiming our reality, reclaiming our ancestral memory, requires serious effort on our part. So for example, this building is not a pyramid. The Kemetic name for this structure, Kemet is the original name for the country that the Greeks called Egypt. Kemet means the land of the black people. Not the black soil as National Geographic would have you believe, but the land of the black people. They were very clear about who they were. The structure is not a pyramid. Pyramid is a Greek word which means a little flat cake, like a pancake. That was the Greeks' way of disparaging the architectural accomplishments of the ancient Kemites. Oh, this building is nothing. This 45-story building is nothing. It's just a little pancake. The Kemetic word for this structure is mir, M-I-R. Mir means place of ascension. Mir were built over tombs. Some people were actually buried underneath the mir. Why? Because this structure served symbolically as a resurrection machine. It was a place where the souls of the departed were resurrected into the afterlife, into the beautiful West. Totally different concept from pyramid, isn't it? So if you can't understand your own terminology and the history associated with your terminology, you will walk away believing that the Egyptians were pagan, that they were evil. You won't know, you won't be able to access your historical cultural memory. This statue is not the Sphinx. Sphinx is a Greek word. a word that means to strangle or to hold. The story of the Sphinx, the name Sphinx comes from the story of King Oedipus and the Sphinx, written by Sophocles. It's a story which literally turns the Kemetic story upside down. The image of Heru, the statue is called Heru, Heru on the horizon. It is the face of Heru, the son of Asar and Aset. If you understand the Kemetic story of Asar and Aset, you realize that Asar is the personification of the person that Christians will later come to know as the Christ. His is the first story in the recorded history of humanity of a person who was resurrected from the dead. And this is his son, who was conceived by the spirit of his father after his death. The spirit of his father Asar impregnated his virgin wife Aset, and she gave birth to Heru on December the 25th, at least 3,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. So if you don't know your history and your story, it will be very difficult for you to begin to understand when someone has taken your story, turned it upside down, changed the names, and then present it back to you as your only way to salvation. It's important that we understand the value of restoring our cultural memory, not someone else's cultural memory. So this is a process. And so, I don't want you to feel bad if you don't know this. Just understand that we have been educated by people who have a vested interest in keeping us separated from knowledge of our history and culture. So once we know that, then it's our obligation to do everything within our power to free our minds by reading as much as we can about our history that has been written by our historians and not someone else's historians. That's the only way we can move forward. So now with your minds partially restored, I want you to access your memories and let us return to the present moment. Hold on one second. And let me just ask you to identify a few things. Who is this? George Washington. What is that? Washington's monument. Who is that? Asar. That is Asar. And what is that? Obelisk. That is, no, it's not an obelisk. Obelisk is a Greek name. That is Asar's monument, which is known as a tekin in Kemet. That, brothers and sisters, is the oldest symbol of resurrection known to man. I told you all that Asar was the first person in recorded history who was resurrected from the dead. And that is a symbol that represents his resurrection. So you can begin to see how others have literally co-opted our history and the symbols associated with our history and used that knowledge in order to insert them in a place in history where they don't belong, where they have never belonged. Hijacking our historical and cultural memories in order to create an inappropriate place for them in history and in the consciousnesses of people all over the world. So this is an important process, something that we can't take lightly. And so it is because of this that Dr. Carter G. Woodson established Negro History Week, and an opportunity to create a time and a space where we can become actively involved in the process of restoring our memory. And what we've come to understand in the years since that celebration was set in motion, Negro History Week evolved to become an entire month, and now it's known as Black History Month, and some refer to it as African Heritage Month. It's an opportunity where we mentally and spiritually engage in restoring our cultural memory. And what we find is that as we slowly begin to regain our memory, it changes our thoughts and our behavior. Consequently, we no longer refer to ourselves as Negroes or colored people. In the 60s, we began calling ourselves black. In the 80s, we began calling ourselves African Americans. And in the 21st century, it's time that we started calling ourselves Africans, because that is who we are. And if we identify ourselves as anything less, we will be less than who we are. And so what I've come to truly understand is that if the story of African people were a book of 1,000 pages, then the story of our enslavement would begin on page 997 and would only be 2 pages long. But we have been conditioned to believe that that is when our story begins. And as a consequence, we have, as Dr. Clark has stated on numerous occasions, been written out of the respectable commentary of human history. And so I want us to think about the first 500 pages of this book of African history. They detail the birth and the development of human beings, humanity, Homo sapiens sapiens. It's a Latin word that describes man with thought and with the capacity to know that he's thinking. Thinking man. Sapien means wise, a man with wisdom and has the wisdom to know that he's wise. So the first person with the capacity for thought were us, our ancestors. They only lived in Africa. The oldest skeletal remains of Homo sapiens sapiens have only been found in Africa. It has been proven genetically that Africans have the oldest DNA of any human beings on the planet. And last year, October 9th of last year, the Washington Post was an article that talked about what is now acknowledged as the oldest skeleton of a human being that was found in Africa a decade ago, but they sat on this information for 10 years. It was the skeletal remains of a person that they have named Artie. Artie. Prior to that, the oldest skeleton was one that they named Lucy. All right? But the skeleton of Artie precedes Lucy by 1.5 million years. Geneticists have proven beyond a shadow of doubt that every human being on this planet carries within their bodies the mitochondrial DNA that links them to a group of women who are still living in Africa today. So, as John Jackson said in the Introduction to African Civilization, there's only one race, the human race, which is African. There are those who have retained their African phenotype and others who have speciated or evolved to become the other so-called races that now populate the planet. But we were the first human beings, developed the first cultures and the first civilization. I want us to think about the fact, America's first so-called black president, Bill Clinton, moved into Harlem, right? And he was the first wave of that effort to bring Europeans back to Harlem. And as you said, brother, Europeans are now the dominant population in Harlem. More white folk in Harlem today than there are black folk. They have taken over the hood. But I want you all to remember in 1998, when Clinton made one of his last trips to Africa. He landed first in Accra, Ghana. And when he stepped off the plane in Ghana, CNN showed it, but they didn't really broadcast what he said. But when he stepped off the plane in Ghana, he said to the world how proud he was to be in Africa, the birthplace of humanity. And then a week later, he was in Cape Town, South Africa, and he was interviewed by Tavis Smiley. And he shared with Tavis that just less than 4 months ago, scientists found less than 100 miles from where they were taping that interview, the oldest human footprint on the planet. They didn't talk about that, but Clinton knew where he was. And he shared with those who had ears to hear the importance of African history and culture. I've traveled to Kemet 45 times since I made my first trip with Dr. Ben in 1980. And I want to share with you what I know, not what I believe. Belief is something you accept without proof. But knowledge is what matters. And what I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Kemet is the oldest documented nation state on record. Kemet was responsible for creating and giving to humanity, whether she did it intentionally or not, everything that is the foundation of culture and civilization and literacy and architecture and science and philosophy, all sprang from the minds of African men and women on the Nile Valley. I want us to understand very clearly that African civilization thrived in the Nile River Valley for 3,000 years before the first Europeans came in and got a taste of civilization. And they took that small piece back to Europe with them, and only then did Europe begin to rise as a nation. And they conspired to marshal their forces and come back into Africa and take as much as they could. And in the process of taking, they had to erase the memory of what ancient Kemet was. And that's the reason why in that historical clock, the ceiling of the Library of Congress begins with Egypt. It begins with Kemet because they know. So if we look at pages 850 to 996, we would read about the great civilizations in Southern Africa, in Central Africa, in West Africa. Civilizations in Zimbabwe and Timbuktu and Songhai and Nigeria and Ghana and Mali. Great African civilizations that were literally erased with the onset of the European enslavement of African people. So on page 997 of this book of African history, we would begin to read about the European enslavement of African people, which lasted from 1444 until 1888. So within that period of time, we can say conservatively that 55 million African men, women, and children lost their lives. And that's a lowball figure. But let's just look at that figure. 55 million African men, women, and children stolen from their homelands, taken to Europe, North America, South America, and every island of the Caribbean, where they were used to build up these nations at the expense of Africa, at the expense of the African homeland. So this loss of life is almost impossible to calculate, but it is possible. And I submit to you that the loss of African life through the Ma'afa is the equivalent of the loss of life that America experienced on September 11, 2001, which is approximately 3,000 lives. It is the equivalent of September 11th happening every day for 44 years and 8 months. Can you imagine this continuous onslaught, day after day after day after day for 44 years and 8 months? That's what happened to us. That is the effort, the ongoing effort that went on to ensure that our memory was erased and that the erasure was forgotten. So that when somebody who looked like you tried to retrieve your memory, you say, nigga, you crazy. Here you come talking that black stuff again. As if there's something wrong with you identifying with your essence. So we struggle to overcome these odds. And what I want to do is to take a moment and give you a more dynamic visual representation of this comprehensive overview of history. And I want to share with you a timeline that a colleague of mine in the UK developed that really helps to explain who we were and where we were. And could I have about 5 brothers to come up here to the front of the room? I want to take this timeline and share it with the audience. I'd like for you all to hold it out. Okay, brother, you can start here on this end. And if you all can stand behind, stand behind, close to the stage. George, move down, so move down as far as you can. Stand behind, stand behind. Okay, that's good enough, brother. And Smart, can you move down a little bit? Okay. This is a timeline that my colleague developed in the UK. He was a history teacher. And so, high school history teacher. So he found it's kind of difficult to get his students to relate to history. So he created this pictorial timeline that showed you African history and then related African history with specific individuals during specific points in time in history, and then he begins to contrast African history with other aspects of world history and culture. So then we began 5200 BCE here in Kemet, in Africa, the oldest documented civilization on earth. We have the beginnings of Medu Neter, we have the beginnings of Kemetic concept of spirituality, the beginnings of writing, the beginnings of architecture, the beginnings of philosophy, and then right here, we began to have images of personalities who are responsible for developing the nation. We have Narmer here, who unified the two lands of Kemet. We have here Ptah, who is a Neter associated with creation. We have here the pyramid builders. We have Imhotep, who's responsible for creating the step pyramid, the first man-made structure of stone. We have an image of Zoser here, so we can see the people associated with these moments in time and history. Then we have the mirror at Giza and images of Khufu, Khafra, Menkaura. So we can see the African faces of the African people who are responsible for creating their history. This is the first golden age of Kemet, when all of the pyramids were built, dynasties 3, 4, 5, and 6. We see here images of other historical African personalities, and you can see their faces. They're all African people. The Greeks haven't come into Kemet yet. The Romans have not come in yet. The Arabs have not come in yet. So by going to the historical records, we can see clearly who these people were. We don't have to make up history. You just go to the records. The records are still here. Kemet suffered a period of internal disorder, the second period of confusion, when Asiatics invaded Kemet for the first time in its history, approximately 150 years. And then we had, I forgot the second golden age, dynasties 11 through 12, when all of the great literature of Kemet was written. The spiritual texts, great literary texts, the wisdom texts, it's all documented, it's all there. For anybody with the mind and curiosity to seek out for themselves and empower themselves. Here's a period of internal disorder and invasion of Kemet. The Europeans, or the Asiatics, only conquered the northern part of Kemet. They never went up south. They never went into Waset, the capital. They never went into Nubia. They only controlled a very small portion of the nation. And when they were driven out, they left Kemet. It was only then that they left with the God concept. They didn't have it before they were in Africa. And then we have here the third golden age, dynasties 18 and 19, when all of the grand temples were built. Temple of Luxor, Temple of Karnak, Abu Simbel. Period of great engineering and temple construction. And then we have here, again, all the personalities associated with African history and culture. And as we see on this timeline, we have a third intermediate period when civilization in Kemet fell again. And then the last great walk in the sun for African people was during the fourth golden age, when the 25th dynasty conquered Egypt and restored the land, and allowed Africa to experience, allowed Kemet to experience what Dr. Clark referred to as its last great walk in the sun. And then when the 25th dynasty ended, the end of Kemet began to exist. Foreigners then occupied Kemet from that point on. First the Persians and then other Europeans. And if we look at this timeline, it is only here, around 832, that Homer, the first European to write a book, comes on the scene. Thousands of years after the great literary period in ancient Kemet. So we can contrast our story to their story and turn our world right side up. It's only here in 753 when Romulus and Remus found the city of Rome. So we can put them into their correct historical context. And then it's only here when Alexander conquers Egypt and the Egyptians begin to become white, non-African. And at the end, after the end of Black Kemet, after the end of Black Kemet. And then there's other periods of Kemetic history. Another important point that my colleague noted in this map is that 1200 BC, according to the research of Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, 1200 BCE is when Africans from the Nile Valley began to build ships, navigate the Nile River, the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, and began coming to America. So Africans traveled to the Americas between 1200 and 600 BCE. We did come before Columbus. So then, this is when Jesus was born, in the year 0. So all of this happened thousands of years before the birth of Jesus Christ. The story of Asar, Set, and Heru preceded the story of Jesus the Christ. And it's all there for us to see. It's all there for us to understand if we are courageous enough to take this leap of consciousness to free our minds. And it is a leap of consciousness. And then the important thing that I want to share with you is this period right here in blue. From here to here, 1444 to 1888. This is the period of enslavement, the European enslavement of African people. So for most of us, this is where our history begins, with the slave trade, with slavery. So if we allow others to establish this as our point of cultural memory, it means that we are missing out on all of this knowledge, all of this science, all of this philosophy, all of this data that can empower us to become the men and women that we truly are. And unfortunately, for many of our folk, we're stuck here. We're still lamenting what happened to our ancestors 200, 300, 400 years ago because we don't know that we have the capacity, we have the right to tap into all of these memories. That's your birthright. So the purpose of history is to help us restore our memory so that we know where to go in this clock of human history, where we can go to retrieve information that will help us to move forward to create a future that we design and stop living somebody else's reality, which is our nightmare. And then the other thing that the brother did was, you understand that our history is occurring. You study history in order to understand where you've been, where you are, and where you're going to go. You apply the knowledge of the past in order to determine where not only you're going to go, but where your great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are going to go. If you can't think and plan for 7 generations in the future, you are wasting air. If you can't begin to plan now for 150 years into the future, you're not living. You're not free. You're not doing what free men and women are supposed to do. So he extends our timeline into the future by tapping into the knowledge of our scholars, Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark and Obinga and Sister Marimba and a host of others who have given us the knowledge that will show us the way forward. This is where we are. And we have to make a conscious choice today whether or not we're going to begin to embrace the memories of the past and then begin to use that knowledge to determine where we're going in the future. Thank you. Can you roll that up for me, please, brother? So then, challenge then becomes, how willing are we to use the resources that we have at our disposal in order to ensure that our children are prepared for a future that we design? Everybody in this room pays taxes. And the lion's share of your taxes goes to support a school system that is miseducating your children and everyone else's children. And the only reason that happens is because we are either too lazy or too afraid or too disorganized to do anything about it. Brother Oliver here was talking about what we did back in the 50s and the 60s in order to control our destiny. We're still riding on the coattails of the decisions that they made 40 and 50 years ago. It's time for us to start making some real decisions about our future and the future of our children, because the humanity of the world depends on us beginning to, just place it right there on the table, brother, depends on us beginning to accept our rightful place as the mothers and fathers of civilization once again. So there is a direct correlation between ancestral memory, power, cultural capital, and health. If you don't know who you are, you won't be able to understand how to live for life. And you will spend your time and energy living a life in which you're already dead, you just haven't died yet. There's a brother who is becoming a good friend of mine, Brother Tom Morrell, who spoke this morning over at the Alpha Conference, authored a book called Brainwashed, challenging the myth of black inferiority. It is a book that I would highly recommend that every one of you go out, purchase, and study. It is a book not to be read, it is a book to be studied. Brainwashed by Tom Burrell. Tom Burrell was one of the first American Africans to start an advertising agency in 1971. And when he retired from his company, Burrell Communications, in 2005, it was the largest black-owned advertising agency in the world. It had annual receipts of almost $200 million a year. He was a major player in advertising. He was the person responsible for producing ads that showed us for the first time in a positive light, not just as consumers, but people who had some value and people who were worthy of some respect. And so since he's retired, he has now taken his energies to begin to look at how we have been conditioned to buy things we don't need. He talks about how we bought into this myth of black inferiority. And as a consequence, black folks spend more money on household cleaning appliances than any other people in this country. Because we believe that black is inferior, black is dirty, so we spend more money, psychologically, we spend more money buying cleaning goods, trying to clean the blackness out of our skin. You know, the Tidy Bowl, this little blue gadget that you put in your toilet to make the water blue, black folk buy 85% of that product. We have been brainwashed. We have been conditioned to believe in our own inferiority. And what he does with great intelligence and with a plethora of facts and details is shows how the media has conditioned us to work against our own best interests. And he shows in each chapter of the book the short-term and long-term effects of our ignorance. He has chapters on black-on-black relationships, why we can't stay together. He's got a chapter on why we eat ourselves to death. And being the advertising genius that he is, he comes up with these magnificent catchphrases that really allow the concepts to stick in your mind. He talks about how black folks suffer from, we're at the top of every worst disease list in the United States. We have the highest incidence of prostate cancer. Black men in the United States have the highest incidence of prostate cancer. Black men in Washington, D.C., the capital, the wealthiest, most powerful nation on earth, have the highest incidence of prostate cancer on the planet. So with all the education we got in Washington, D.C., with all the money that we got in Washington, D.C., we are dying more. Black men are dying more in greater numbers than any other black men on the planet. Black women have the highest rate of cervical and breast cancer of any females on the planet. We have the highest incidence of diabetes. We have the highest incidence of people on kidney dialysis. Why? Because of diet one. And he refers to this process of us killing ourselves through the food that we eat as chewicide. We literally eat ourselves to death. Eat ourselves to death. And you can drive through any black neighborhood in the country and you see evidence of us eating ourselves to death. All this fried food, all this pork. That's suicide. And we don't have enough historical awareness to realize that that's slave food. That's not food that we ate in Africa. That was part of our diet when we were enslaved here in America, because as Malcolm said in one of his lectures, white folk ate high on the hog. They ate the best part of the hogs. If you're going to eat hog, eat the best part of the hog. But we eat everything but the oil. We ate low on the hog, the feet, the tail, the snout. And what's lower than chitlins? We ate that stuff, but Mama cooked that with love. She infused all that funk with love and made it taste good, but we didn't realize we were eating ourselves to death. Sugar runs in the family. Diabetes runs in the family. Damn it, that's because you're eating the same stuff that your mama ate, your grandmama ate. Change your diet and you change your relationship to health. It's Sesame Street simple. It's not rocket science. Change your diet, change the intake of the things that come into your body. You change the chemistry of your body. It is simple. But we've been conditioned to be a people who are moved by emotion and taste, appetites. And this is a false way of living. This is a faulty way of living. This is a disastrous way of living because, as Brother Oliver says, next year we'll have a net worth of over $1 trillion. We'll have a net worth of the 7th largest nation in the United States.
In the world.
In the world, Spain. We got all this money. What do we own? What institutions do we have? So we're at a point in our lives where we can no longer afford to act like we don't know. Because folk have a plan for us. They don't need us anymore because they got Hispanics to do what we used to do. So they can escalate the process of us killing ourselves. There's a chapter in Tom Morell's book called Homicide, why black folk kill each other. And the numbers are startling. You all see it right here in Brooklyn. Every single week you're reading stories about black folk who are killing other black folk for no reason whatsoever. There's a chapter in there about comedians, which he refers to as the new neo-coons. Why the laugh is always on us. Why we're the only people who laugh at things that are embarrassing. We're the only people who will pay money to listen to comedians curse you out. Every other word is profanity. B and H and S and all of this nonsense. And we laugh as if it's funny. So we've got to do a serious reevaluation of what it means to be the descendant of kings and queens and artisans and craft persons and nobles. And either we're going to start acting like it or we need to shut the hell up and stop pimping our ancestors. Because they don't deserve to be pimped that way. We got the best in us, and it's time for us to start acting like it. I want to share this good news with you to wind this session down, because I can talk about this stuff, forever. But I just want to encourage you all to go out and buy Brainwash by Tom Browder. I'm not even pushing my own books. Go out and buy Brainwash. It's a book which...
Brainwash be purchased.
That's my bookstore.
Brother, where's your bookstore?
It's 492 Nostrand Avenue.
And what is the name of your bookstore?
True South. True South Books.
Are you open now?
We're open now.
Brainwash. Find that book and study that book.
$16.
We're going to talk about, the sister's got a copy. Sister, can you bring a copy of the book up here for a second? Have a brother bring the book up here. Don't walk up here. Have a brother bring the book up here.
Can I say that he will be at Abyssinia,
Oh, that's right, on Sunday.
9 a.m. and 11 a.m. Sunday?
Go see Tom Morell, all right? Go see Tom Morell, and when you see him, tell him Tony Browder sent you, all right? Tell him Tony Browder sent you. This is a magnificent book. The first 11 chapters, he talks about the problems that we're confronted with. In the last chapter, the 12th chapter, he deals with solutions to the problems. All right? So this is an unusual book in that regard. It is, I shared with Tom last week that in my humble estimation, this is the 21st century version of the miseducation of the Negro. The brainwashing of the Negro. And he gives us the blueprint for how we can begin to dry clean our minds. All right? Chapter 12 talks about using the media, the most powerful form of mass communication, mental manipulation ever devised. How we can use the media, the internet, social media networks, cell phones, web pages, YouTube, how we can use this to spread truth and light all over our communities. It's a powerful tool, and it's cheap. So we're going to give you some suggestions as to how you can become involved in this process of freeing your mind. I love the fact that he begins the book with a quote from Malcolm in the introduction. And that quote is a quote that you all have heard dozens and dozens of times. You've been misled. You've been had. You've been took. You've been brainwashed. And it's time for you to dry clean your mind. You've got to do it. White man's not going to do it for you. Your mama's not going to do it for you. Your daddy's not going to do it for you. Jesus ain't going to do it for you. You've got to do it because you have within you the power and the ability to determine your own destiny. It is your birthright. It is in your DNA. Once you understand that, then it becomes a simple thing to do. So let me share with you this news that I'm very excited about. You all are the second audience that I'm sharing this information with. In 2008, I was in Egypt working on doing some research for a new book, and a colleague of mine, an Egyptian colleague of mine, came to my apartment and said that there's a person that I should meet. And this person is a Russian Egyptologist by the name of Dr. Lena Pishtakova, who lives here in New York City, who was trained, came to the United States in 1990, got a degree from NYU in Egyptology, trained under Bernard Bothmore, who was at that time the foremost authority on the art and the architecture of the 25th dynasty. The 25th dynasty is that era in Kemetic history. It is the era of the last of the four golden ages, Africa's last great walk in the sun. It is the only period in Kemetic history that European Egyptologists acknowledged was ruled by black pharaohs. We know better, but they give us the 25th dynasty. Why? Because the kings from the 25th dynasty came from Kush. Kemet was as knocked out as George Foreman was in the Rumble in the Jungle. Right? Kemet was flat on his back. And so the Kushite kings came into Kemet, drove out the Libyans, drove out the Assyrians, and restored order from the south to the north. And then they underwent a massive rebuilding project. First Pianke, then his brother Shabaka. And then their sons followed in their footsteps. They gave us an example of what black men did when they were in control of their destiny. It is a model that we can use today, that our black men throughout the United States can use today. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The information is already here waiting for us to tap into. So Dr. Lena Pishtakova worked for the Metropolitan Museum. She was involved in excavating and conserving a number of tombs in Egypt, specifically in Luxor. In her spare time, she was looking for these tombs, these 25th dynasty tombs that she had read about in a 19th century book written by a couple of British travelers who had seen the tomb. She also had read a book by a German architect by the name of Eigner, who had visited that tomb in the 1970s. She knew that these were important tombs, built in the early part of the 25th dynasty. She had a general idea of where they were. So in her spare time, working for the Metropolitan Museum, she began to use her money to hire workers to dig in an area known as South Ossetia. And in 2005, she found the tombs. And so when she came to her employer and told her employer of her discovery, this 25th dynasty tomb, the 25th dynasty tomb is an era of, it is the era of the Rehimimesu, the repetition of the birth. It is documented as the first Renaissance in recorded history, where Africans were physically involved in reconstituting the land of their ancestors. And in these images that she found in this tomb, specifically the tomb of Karakamun, who was the first archpriest of the Temple of Karnak, in this tomb, built 2,700 years ago, she found images of this African wearing the same clothing of his ancestors who were the pyramid builders in the first golden age, who lived 8,000 years earlier. She found him sitting on the same furniture, same style of furniture as his ancestors had 2,000 years earlier. So it represented what they already knew, that the 25th dynasty was an era of retroactive remembrances. Sankofa, going back and accessing the memories of the past and bringing them into the present moment so that you can create a future for the children who are coming behind you. And it's all documented, and it's all African. So she went to her employer, the Metropolitan Museum, told them of her discovery, and they told her, leave it alone. Walk away from it. But this is history. It shows you that the black people from Kush were the same black people as the ones who built the pyramid. Those are not your people. Leave them alone. So this courageous woman quit her job. Used her own money, her 401k, to finance the excavation. And when she ran out of money, she used her daughter's college fund to pay for it. So when I met her in July of 2008, she had run out of money. And she was afraid. Maxed out her credit cards, didn't know where she was going to turn. I was introduced to her by a colleague. She was apprehensive of me at first. You know, who are you and what are you? And we talked a little bit, and I felt her heart, felt that she was sincere. And then she took me down into the tomb, and when I saw what was there, I knew that this is something that I needed to get involved with. And I made a commitment to her that I would get the word out. I would let folk know what you have here. And I would raise money so that we can see to it that this history is restored. So we cultivated a relationship, and in 2009, I took my first group of folk over to Egypt to participate in this process, in this excavation. We financed the excavations of 2008, 2009. We made some incredible discoveries. 2010, we financed that year's excavation. This past summer, we took a total of 13 people over to participate in the excavation. She's got students coming from all over the world to participate in this. PhD students, master students from universities in Arizona, universities in England, white folk coming to learn about our history so that they can become the experts to tell our story. We were there for a different purpose. And we were there because we financed all of the work that was going on. And we struck pay dirt last month. So I want to share with you very briefly what we found. This project that we have, this is the image of Karakamun, the priest, the first archpriest of the Temple of Karnak. The project is called the Asa Restoration Project, named in honor of Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, who passed in Egypt August 13, 2007. He was there for the ASCAT conference when he fell ill. He was hospitalized in Cairo and passed in Cairo. So Dr. Hilliard was my colleague. Dr. Hilliard was my spiritual father, my guide, my brother. He wrote the introduction to my first book from the Browder file. And so I felt, what better way could I honor my brother than to name this project after him? I went to Atlanta, I spoke with his family, I received their blessings and their permission, so we established the Asa Restoration Project, which is a non-profit entity, which means that any contribution you made to this project can legally be written off as a tax-deductible expense. So, this is what we're doing. This is South Asasif. This is the area where the excavations are currently taking place. South Asasif is in Luxor, Egypt, on the west bank of Luxor, Egypt, right near the Valley of the Kings. For those of you who have been to Kemet, if you've gone to the Temple of Hatshepsut, you've driven right past this site. There used to be a village right here, homes. A village that was run by the Abdullah Rasul family, who was the chief of the village. The Rasuls are the greatest tomb robbers in the history of Egypt. For over 200 years, they robbed the tombs of our ancestors and sold their artifacts on the white market to tourists. Financed their lifestyle at our historical and cultural expense. When Dr. Lena found the three tombs there, the tomb of Karabashkin. Karabashkin was the mayor of Waset, Luxor, or Thebes. That was the capital of Kemet. He was appointed mayor under the rulership of Pianke. So this is the beginning of the 25th dynasty. Karakamun was the first archpriest of the Temple of Karnak, the largest temple complex ever built by human beings. He was responsible for doing the morning libations at the Chapel of Amun in the Temple of Karnak. And then there's the 26th dynasty tomb of Itieru. Itieru was the sister who was the chief attendant to the divine consort of the wife of Amun. Important tombs. So as a result of her discoveries, last year the Egyptian government came in and removed all of the homes so that we would have free access to this site to do our excavation work. So this is what we're doing. This is an image from last year. This is a photograph of the same area from this year, last month, actually July. And so what we see here is the open courtyard, the first open pillared hall of this tomb. I want you all to see this tomb of Karakamoon in your mind. This tomb is 40 feet underground, literally carved out of limestone. So this tomb is not architecture, it's sculpture. So you had in the first pillared hall 8 pillars that were 4-sided pillars that have on 3 of the 4 sides 3 of the hours of the day. So 4 pillars on one side were the 12 hours a day, 4 pillars on the other side were the 12 hours of night. So the idea was that the spirit of Karakamoon moved through this first pillared hall on his way to the second pillared hall where his burial chamber was. And as he walked along this corridor, he was surrounded by the words that his soul must say, as his heart is about to be weighed on the scale of my eye. This is a way of ensuring that this brother will be Ma'at Keru, truer voice. All of this was destroyed by the Greeks, by the Romans, by the Arabs. The ceiling of this tomb collapsed in the 1990s. And that collapse probably saved this tomb from further destruction. So all of this was covered with sand. It all had to be removed. So you got to pay for the workers, got to pay for the supplies. Here is the pillars in the first pillared hall. This is the excavation that we did last year. This year, we are focusing our energies on the second pillared hall, which was right through this entranceway here. So we covered 7 of the pillars with mud bricks in order to protect them as the workers are moving back and forth so that they aren't damaged. They're all covered with metal netting. They were originally about 10 feet high. They're now stumps maybe about 3.5, 4 feet high because they've all been destroyed. When the ceiling collapsed, they fell. So we're going through all of this debris to find the fragments so that we can reconstruct this tomb. And here is one pillar here that we're literally in the process of reconstructing right now. That was one of the goals for this year. So here's a detailed shot of that first pillar. We have a group of conservators who are consolidating the stone so that we can have new limestone placed on top of the missing pieces so that we can reconstruct this pillar and then insert the pieces of metal netting that we found within the debris so that ultimately we can reconstruct the entire tomb and open it to the public. So here's a shot that was taken in early July. We hired a stone cutter to cut the blocks of limestone to specific dimensions so that they could be inserted onto this pillar. The workers are drilling holes into the stone, inserting steel rods, cementing these pieces together so that it will be consolidated and be able to ultimately hold a ceiling so that we can recreate this entire environment. And then here's the last shot that was taken in August, just before we shut down at the end of the season. So this column now is about 10 feet high. We have to do the same thing to the 7 additional columns in that first courtyard. It costs approximately $10,000 just to reconstruct this one column. So this is an endeavor that is going to require funds, consistent funds. It's going to take anywhere from about 7 years, 5 to 7 years to complete this work. And Europeans have already said they're not paying for it because they don't want this story to be public. So we have an opportunity right now to spend our dollars to help tell our story. So here's another shot of the first pillared hall. This is the area where we concentrated our efforts. And so we're now working in the area of the second pillared hall. This is the view that shows you the first pillared hall, and this is the area where we concentrated all of our excavations this season. And so I'm over there in July, getting the lay of the land, getting the feel of the tomb. Over there with Egyptologists, over there with students who've gotten their PhDs in Egyptology and their masters in Egyptology. And I don't have a degree in Egyptology. No, I just have an interest in the information. But I'm here with an agenda. I'm here with money, bringing money to the table to make all of this possible. And I have a vested interest in seeing that the story of Karakamoon is told, seeing that his spirit is finally honored after being desecrated for over 2,000 years. And so as I'm moving through this environment, I'm literally tapping into the consciousness of Karakamoon, tapping into the people who built this sacred space, asking them for permission to be there doing this work, asking them to help me understand where it is we should concentrate our energies, because we don't have a lot of money. We can't afford to be just digging anywhere. Tell me where we should dig. Tell me where we can maximize our efforts. And so, I don't know if it was Karakamoon or who said, Browder, tell them to dig right in this area. So I tell Dr. Lena, why don't you have the workers here concentrate right at this spot right here. This is where you're going to find the stairs. 2 days later, Dr. Lena, Tony, we found it. We found the stairs. So by mid-July, we found the first stairs that led down to the burial chamber. By August, they had opened up the entrance to the burial chamber. This is my daughter, Atlantis, right? And so we went inside of this chamber. Let me just give you a brief overview of what we saw, what we found. And this is what made news last week. As a matter of fact, today they announced it on the Town Joy in the Morning show. Right? So it's going national now. Right? So hopefully our folk will begin to respond. We'll get money, we'll get materials, we'll get more people involved in the process so that we can be guaranteed of completing the work. This is my daughter crawling through the rubble, coming inside of this burial chamber. And no, we were not afraid, right? Because we're doing good work. Because we are protected by our ancestors. We're not here as tomb robbers, we're here as tomb restorers. Right? Big difference, big difference. Here's Dr. Lena coming in behind Atlantis. And then you come into the main area of the burial chamber, which is some 10 feet below the ground of the floor of the tomb. Now the tomb is 40 feet below ground level. This initial chamber is 10 feet below that, 50 feet below ground level. And then we find this shaft, which extends down 30 feet into the stone. So we're now 80 feet below the surface. We didn't have a 30-foot long ladder. We had a couple of 15-foot ladders. So what the workers did was tie 2 ladders together. And we climbed down this ladder into the burial chamber. And again, no, we were not afraid because we were doing our ancestors' work. Right? We were protected by them. So here, Atlantis is climbing down the ladder. And then this is what we found inside the burial chamber. This is inside of the burial chamber, inside of the tomb of Karakamoon.
Hey,
Right.
hey.
So now, this is what Zahir Was and the Supreme Council of Antiquities released the press release on last week, announcing to the world this discovery. So it's important for us to understand that American Africans, us, financed this. We made it possible. And so, as my daughter and I had reached the bottom of the ladder and about to go into the burial chamber, I said, baby, I want you to go in first. Because I want you to be the first American African to go inside of this tomb. All right? So here we are. The tomb, the burial chamber, is about 12 feet wide, 18 feet long. Height from floor to ceiling is approximately 7 feet. But the Rasuls beat us there. They had already robbed the tomb. They had already desecrated this sacred space. And not only did they steal the artifacts, but in their effort to cover their tracks, they filled the room with debris. Ooh. So we're sitting on a pile of rubble that's approximately 4 feet high. So we only have about 3 feet clearance between the rubble and the ceiling in this small environment. So I want to show you some highlights of this space, right? On the ceiling is an image of Nut, the Netcher, who represents the sky, who swallows the sun when it sets in the west and gives birth to it in the east as Kepri. So this ceiling is covered with celestial and astronomical scenes to guide the soul of Karakamun as he makes his journey to the beautiful West. Right? So here is a more detailed image. Look at that African face. Look at that Nubian face. Huh? So when you're in charge of telling your story, you can depict your images of your ancestors, of your Netru, in your image. Because that's what free people do. As Dr. Ben said a long time ago, man was not made in the image of God. God was made in the image of man. Because man created the concepts of God in order to allow his mind to move forward into a world that the Netru created. So we create images of the Netru that look like us because we're exercising our prerogative. Why? Because we are the Netru's chosen people. Because we chose the Netru. Right? That's how it works.
Can you repeat that, my brother? God is not made of what?
Well, the idea, the concept is free people choose their relationship with the Creator, choose their relationship with God. And free people create God, or the Netru, in their own image. So we made the choice to choose our relationship with God. We were the first chosen people known to man. So when you know that, it changes your whole attitude. It changes your consciousness. It changes your relationship with this force, this power that we call God. Because it exists within you. It is in every cell in your body. And when you know that, it creates a relationship that allows you to do anything. And that's why we did and how we did what we did when we were in Kemet. No people on the planet have done what we've done. That demonstrates our relationship with the Netru, our relationship with God. No people on the planet have ever had that quality of a relationship with deity as we have. So we need to stop looking to other people's concept of God and return home. Be true to ourselves, be true to what? Our God, be true to our native land. So then, here is an image of celestial figures, constellations in the heavens. This is how we go home. These were the first people to give humanity a concept of heaven, a concept of the salvation of the soul, a concept of judgment, a concept of resurrection. These were all concepts that sprang from the minds of African men and women in the Nile Valley when we knew who we were and demonstrated that knowledge every day of our lives. Stars in the heavens. 5-pointed stars which represent your body. Head, 2 arms, 2 legs. That's why all stars that we see on the flags of all countries have 5 points on them. That's a Kemetic invention. That's a Kushite invention. And what we know through the real study of history, what we know when we study Chancellor Williams, author of Destruction of Black Civilization, Kemet is Ethiopia's oldest daughter. So the culture really begins further south and further east. And it's all connected. It's all interrelated. I had some wonderful conversations with some Egyptologists from all over the world who are not held in check by some of the racist views in America. And they were telling me things about the relationship between the Kemites and the modern-day Sudanese and the modern-day Ethiopians, that they're all part of the same culture. They have the same oral traditions. We don't get that information here. No. But folk know that. So it's time for us to begin to do the research, do the primary research, and share that knowledge with the rest of our brothers and sisters. So here's Atlantis again, here's Dr. Lena, here's Hassan. Hassan is the person that introduced me to Dr. Lena 3 years ago. Okay, part of our family, part of our extended family. And then here's Atlantis. Atlantis and I spent a week in this burial chamber, excavating, recording, and photographing the objects that we found. I want you all to take note of what she's holding in her hand. She is holding the mummified hand of a child. So what we found in this burial chamber were the remains of 2 adults and a child. So it is our belief that this was the burial chamber for Karakamun, his wife, and their child. we found in this tomb 2 skulls. Told you these were all mummified remains that the Rasul family violated in the worst way imaginable. Tore apart these bodies, tore apart the caskets to get to the gold, to get to the jewelry, to get to the papyrus scrolls that were buried within their body. They were wrapped within the bandages so that they could sell this to finance their lifestyle. That proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that these are not their ancestors.
No.
They wouldn't do that to their Arab ancestors.
No.
And if they were truly Egyptians, they wouldn't do it to their Egyptian ancestors. They are invaders, and they prove that point over and over and over again. So it is our responsibility as the wealthiest African people on the planet, as the best educated African people on the planet, it is our responsibility to save the motherland.
That's right.
And to tell our story to the world.
Speak on it, brother.
Right? So that's what we're doing. We found a jawbone. So we're finding body parts.
This is simple.
We're doing what Aset did when she went searching for the missing parts of Asar's body. We are literally remembering our history and our culture. It was a special time down there. When we were down there in this tomb 7 hours a day, a week. Felt his spirit. Felt the spirit of his family. With their doing their work. Found a mummified arm. You can still see the wrappings. The linen wrapping in his arm. The bone, his arm is still inside. These people have no respect.
No.
None whatsoever. Yes, sir.
Brother Browder, those colors on the wall, those are the original colors. Is that right?
Those are the original colors of the tomb that was created 2,700 years ago. 2,700 years ago. A lot of it has been destroyed. You can see the ceiling is flaked. And we found hundreds and hundreds of fragments of the ceiling. So part of our job over the course of the next 2-3 years is to try to assemble as many of those fragments back to the ceiling as we can to reconstruct this ceiling. Restore this sacred space. So, here's a shot of the staircase after we cleaned the entire area. So this is what it looked like. Stairs leading down to the burial chamber. There are 15 stairs leading down to the burial chamber. Here's a shot from inside of the burial chamber looking out. 15 stairs leading down. There's a vestibule here, and then there's another ramped staircase with 7 stairs which lead you into the actual burial chamber itself. We paid to have all of this excavated. That happened on our dime. That happened because of us. And I'm proud of what we did. I want the world to know what we did. So here's a photograph of our team. This was the August team that was there. Brothers and sisters who paid their way to come to Kemet to work for 2 weeks on this site. All right? And as I'm moving around, folks say, you know, Tony, you look a lot like Karakamoon, you know? So maybe his spirit is working through me to make all of this happen. I can accept that. I like to think that. But this quote here is a quote that I just, I paraphrase a quote from King Kashta, who was the father of Pianke and Shabaka. And his quote, he was the king of Kush, and he initiated the first effort to restore the land of his ancestors. He died before they marched into Kemet, so his son Pianke continued his father's work. And when Pianke died, his brother Shabaka continued his father's work. And then when they died, their sons continued their efforts because they knew where they were going, they knew what they had to do. Right? And so Kashta's statement says that there is no past, present, or future, for they all exist simultaneously. So there's this thing, this eternal now, which we are involved in. So we can be as free as we want to be. But we have to want to be free. We have to know that we deserve to be free. and know that there is something to protect and to pass on to those who come behind us. We've got the tools at our disposal right now to liberate ourselves. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to invent history or culture. We don't have to make nothing up. We have all the evidence right now. All we need to do is to have the desire to spread the word to as many people as possible. So this is what we're doing through the Asa Restoration Project. We are working to do three primary things. The Asa Restoration Project is dedicated to the restoration of the Cushite presence in Kemet and the preservation of the legacy of Dr. Asa G. Hilliard III. And anybody who doesn't know that Dr. Hilliard's life isn't worth preserving doesn't know Jack. He was a man who gave his life to African people. Right? One of our most brilliant scholars. So, three-pronged project. One, we are looking for 400 people to make a tax-deductible pledge of $10 a month for 1 year. That will give us the $40,000 a year that we need to work on these tombs, to do the excavation, the conservation, and the restoration. Right? 400 people, that ain't a lot of people. So if you stop spending your money at these other shops here in Brooklyn and Chicago and DC and elsewhere, you'll have more than enough money to finance our future. And that's what we're talking about doing. What we also want to do, we like to be able to take at least 40 people back to Kemet next year for the excavation season so that you can be involved, physically involved in the process, for those who want to go. And I'm telling you right now, we only want people who are willing to work. We work 6 days a week, from 6 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon in 115, 120 degree temperature. So if you're not willing to work, we don't need you there. We don't need folk complaining. We don't need folk crying. We don't need, stay here, send your money instead. We need workers. Workers. And the third component, which is also important, for those who can't go, for whatever reason, what we want to establish are cultural circles. Cultural circles are action-oriented study groups that we're going to establish. These cultural circles we have named in honor of Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. The whole purpose of the cultural circle is to put together a curriculum where we're focusing solely on 3 texts. These are action-oriented study groups. Black folk have been talking forever. It's time for us to act. So these are action-oriented study groups. What we're doing is coming together to study 3 texts. The first text is Dr. Hilliard's book, Saber, The Reawakening of the African Mind. The second text is my book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. The third text is Dr. Hilliard's DVD, Master Keys. So that will be our curriculum for understanding the 4 golden ages of Kemet, to be able to put that knowledge into historical context, and then once you have mastered that information, we then want to train people to be able to go out into communities and to teach this information. Take to schools and churches and organizations and meetings so that we can begin to tell our story. Right? We want to be able to provide you with the information. We want to be able to provide you with the slides so that you can tell the story. You ain't got to make nothing up. You don't have to argue with white folk. You just tell the truth. And the truth will free our minds and our behinds. And so then, the whole essence of this project, we're future-oriented. We're action-oriented. You all know this man, right? Will Smith. Will Smith is the man in Hollywood right now. Time magazine referred to Will Smith as the $2 billion man. Everything he touches turns to gold. Will Smith.
What did he give back?
Brother, Will Smith, his wife, and Jay-Z produced Fela. All right? A serious piece. If you ain't seen Fela, brother, you slacking. Go see Fela. It's a powerful story. They're using their money and doing what they can. They're giving back in many different ways. They can't do it overtly because they'll lose their job. All right? They're using their money just like many actors and actresses, entertainers during the civil rights era. They couldn't come out publicly and denote and donate money to the movement. But they did that thing so they can keep their job, keep their profile, make some money, and they finance a lot of the work. So we got to be clear about who's doing what, and we need to kind of temper our critiques and criticism of folk until we check them out thoroughly. We got to stop gossiping and stop tearing each other down, because that's all part of the brainwashing. Right? We're standing on the threshold of a new point in time in history. We ain't got time to be fighting each other. Right? It's time to do the work and work with people who have demonstrated that they are worth working with. Right? So Will Smith currently has in production a film in which he's going to play this man. The film is called The Last Pharaoh. He's going to play Taharka. Taharka was the last major king of the 25th dynasty. So what we are proactively preparing ourselves to do is to train hundreds of people who have an understanding of ancient Kemet and the 25th dynasty. We're going to arm them with the information that we are currently uncovering right now, so that when that movie comes out, we can have thousands of people go to the theater the first weekend and support that film so that it could be #1 in the box office. If black folk, in our foolishness, could make Medea Goes to Jail the #1 movie in America, then we deserve to make The Last Pharaoh the #1 movie for at least 2 weeks running. I'm tired of seeing Medea goes to jail, Medea gets hemorrhoids, Medea acts a fool. That is foolishness. We are paying for foolishness. We're paying to put ourselves back into mental incarceration. So we should be willing to stand up now and pay for our liberation. This is an opportunity, brother, for us to stand up for our own liberation. We got to be forward thinking, all right? So then part of our goal is to begin to initiate that process and to get folk ready for when this thing comes down the pipe. So then, let me just end on this note so we can take a few questions and we can wind down and get out of here so we don't violate our relationship with the folk who operate this space. We got to be respectful of every place we go, all right? Every place we go.
Amen.
Everything we need to do, anything we want to do is already inside of us. Stop looking outside yourself.
Yes.
You are carrying within you the DNA of all of your ancestors. The greatest men and women who ever walked this planet live in you right now. So it's time to tap into those cultural memories, those ancestral memories. Stop complaining. Stop talking about the white man. Stop talking about the white man, because every time you talk about him, you give him power. As the brother was saying, stop spending your money with folk who don't respect you. Stop thinking and talking about people who don't respect you. Talk about yourself. Give yourself that respect. Give yourself that power. And you'll find that just by changing your thought pattern, changing your conversation, you change the power dynamic. And that's what time it is. We are standing on the threshold of a new era of humanity. And we cannot afford to miss the boat this time, brothers and sisters, because if we do, I don't know if our ancestors are going to give us another chance. All right? So take down the web address. You can go to the website. You can right now make a tax-deductible contribution to the Ancient Restoration Project. I'm calling our folk out. If Dr. Lena Pishakova can spend her life savings trying to tell your story, y'all can at least afford to spend $10 a month to show your gratitude and become engaged in the process. So there's no excuse, none whatsoever. So I'll shut up now and take some questions. Yes, sir, brother in the back.
We don't have time, we really don't have time for the questions. And I tell you, let me,
Sure, do your thing, brother, do your thing.
we want to give thanks to Reverend Dillon and the members of this church for allowing us this space. But they're very precise on time. And we were supposed to be out of here really at 9:30.
Okay.
Now, I'm asking you, don't leave, because we also have to pay. I mean, you know, nothing is really free. We have to pay our speaker, we have to raise an honorarium, and you cannot pay for what you have received this evening. Let's give Brother Browder a hand. The sacrifice, the work, the commitment, the dedication, you can't buy that. This is love. But what we can do is give him a token of our appreciation and our love. So don't want to take up a lot of time doing this, but if there's anybody here who can donate tonight $50, would you please raise your hand? Brother Oba and Sister Yah are co-producers of this event. You know, I've been up here talking all evening and they quiet, but we work like that together. We trust each other, we know each other, so one hand washes the other. So Brother Oba here has a basket, in which we want to put something in. So if we can get just 2 people to donate $50 to help us with tonight's expenses, it'll go a long ways. Can we get 2 people with $50? Just 2 people. Open your heart. Any hands? Okay. All right. Let's do $20. How many people we can get that? Okay, thank you, Brother Munderson. $20 for Brother Munderson. Anybody else? Sister who went to Egypt with Brother Browder. I know you enjoyed that trip. Thank you, sister. Thank you, Brother Shabazz. Thank you, Brother Shabazz. What's your name, sister, out of the door there? Sister Grader? I hope we're going to see you next week. Yeah, because thank you so much. We'll be having these lecture series every week. They're very serious. Next week we will be dealing with banning the N-word, how the word nigger promotes enslavement and inferiority, and why that word must be banned from our usage. Okay. Anybody else with $20? Okay. Okay, in the back, that sister in the back got $20. Didn't you raise your hand, sister? Oh, brother Tyrone. Thank you, Brother Tyrone. Let's move down to $10. Let's try to do this real quick. I think probably everybody got $10. Thank you. Thank you, Brother Moses. Thank you. Thank you, sister, so much.
Don't everybody leave.
And don't forget to stop by South Books.
True South.
True South. Why is it True South?
Because we are oriented to the South. That's where our people come from. That's where our culture comes from. That's where our values come from. And if we adhere to those cultures, those values, we're True South.
Go by True South. True South. Nostrand Avenue. What's the address? Nostrand?
492.
492 Nostrand Avenue. All right, everybody, you got $10? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's get all these $10 right quick. We're getting close. We're getting close. We don't want to hold you. We're getting close. Brother Tony has books. He has tapes over here. You want to come?
Like the video. Thumb up the video.